Hello and welcome back to the MMA Girl Podcast with your host, me, the MMA Girl, Jess. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to any of the platforms you're listening to me on. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is episode 18 of the MMA Girl Podcast. And today we're going to be going into, of course, the latest news from the MMA world and from the UFC, of course. And then we're going to be going down the rabbit hole of UFC Nashville happening on Saturday night, headlining, of course, Talis and Teixeira, the new boogeyman of the heavyweight division, versus our dear friend, the dearest of the dear, Mr. Derek Lewis. Now, I'm very excited for this card because coming off of a week without UFC, I tuned into the PFL's Europe card that happened in Brussels. It was very nice and a nice compromising situation, of course, because we did not have any UFC on Saturday. So it was, of course, nice to have something to watch. Let me know if you guys tuned into PFL Brussels, because I'd love to talk to you about that in the comments down below if you guys watched that. So let's get into the latest MMA news. I'm going to go straight in with Donald Trump. Donald Trump just announced that for the 250-year celebration of the USA, he will be hosting it at the White House next year, a big event. And one of those things included in this big celebration will be, as per Donald Trump, agreed to by Dana White, a UFC event at the White House. And of course, when such a thing is announced, you know what's going to happen. There are going to be, of course, a lot of American fighters, especially, volunteering to fight at the White House, because it would be an honor for anyone to fight at the White House celebrating 250 years of the USA. Now, of course, Donald Trump is very friendly with Dana White. We see him a lot coming into events, etc. So this is, for those who aren't politically aligned with Donald Trump, if you are, if you're not, that is not an issue at this point. This is an opportunity to put the UFC on the map even more than it was before. And I think a good thing, seeing as Dana White has a working relationship with the current USA president, is that we can get a little bit more spotlight on our favorite sport, whether we like it or not. So this kind of stuff happening means that we have a great opportunity to see fighters who may have not fought again come back to fight because they want to fight at the White House, including, of course, Mr. Conor McGregor. We saw Conor McGregor tweeting that he had messaged Dana White straight away saying, we don't know what he said because he sent a vocal message, so it showed that he sent a vocal message, and Dana White just said, love it, in capitals, which I think probably means that he was proposing to Dana White that he would like a fight at the White House, and maybe he'll just finish the story with Michael Chandler. That's how I see things. I think that if we were to see Conor McGregor coming back for the 2026 250-year celebration of the USA at the White House for the UFC event that happens on this day, I think that it's perfect for Michael Chandler being America, of course, and Donald Trump having Conor McGregor come in, as they have a great working relationship as well. So for us fans, as MMA fans, this could not be better news, of course, seeing as Conor McGregor, we thought we'd never see him again. Now, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, because maybe, just maybe, this won't happen between Conor and Michael Chandler. But at least for now, Conor is very interested in coming back to UFC in this context at the White House for a UFC event for the 250-year celebration of the USA. And I think that if it's not Michael Chandler, that would be a shame, because I think that, if anything, Conor McGregor owes Michael Chandler a fight, because they did the Ultimate Fighter together now 2 years ago now, and the fight never happened. So every tough coach must fight the opposite coach, unless you're Daniel Cormier and Chael Sonnen, who are doing, of course, their season of the Ultimate Fighter currently and not fighting at all. Obviously, Daniel Cormier said, I'm not willing to fight anyone. I'm retired. That's it. I'm being a coach right now, but I won't be having a fight against Chael Sonnen. That's fine. You're retired, Daniel. We completely understand. But Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler were supposed to be booked in to fight each other as a result of their Ultimate Fighter appearance, and they never did. So why not bring this back and have the Ultimate Fighter final fight between Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler at the White House? That would be a great opportunity for Conor to come back under the Star-Spangled Banner, and of course Michael Chandler would be, I think, more than happy to do so, as well, as he is a very patriotic American. He would love to represent his country at the White House in a kind of USA versus Ireland type fight. Now, I don't know what you guys think about that, but I always love those kinds of ideas. I think it's a very grandiose, very flamboyant thing to do a UFC event at the White House. I think any kind of UFC event in any kind of capacity will be exciting to us UFC fans and MMA fans in general. But to see Conor McGregor wanting to come back for that is cool. I'm not going to lie. Another thing that happened, of course, since Donald Trump announced that he would be hosting a UFC event at the White House for the 2026 250th celebration of the USA, is that Jon Jones is now out of retirement. He has officially come out of retirement. His retirement lasted all of 13 days since he, of course, retired from the UFC, and that Dana White announced at the post-fight press conference at UFC Baku that Jon Jones had called him and decided to relinquish his belt as UFC heavyweight champion, so making Tom Aspinall, as we said, the ultimate undisputed UFC heavyweight champion of the world, and retiring from the UFC. Now, as I said in my podcast a few weeks ago, when the retirement was announced for Jon Jones, I specifically said the wording in which he retired was very important, because he said, I'm retiring from the UFC, which for me at that time meant that he was not closing the door on any opportunities for exhibition boxing matches like Tyson did with Jake Paul, like Conor McGregor did against Mayweather, and also he wouldn't be close to doing MMA or boxing or any other martial arts in another capacity, in another promotion. Now, I didn't think that meant him coming back to the UFC, because I thought it was a definitive choice. But as we've seen with a lot of fighters, like, for example, Amanda Nunes, Henry Cejudo, when they announce their retirement, they may not stick to what they say originally. Because this sport is, I think, for us fans, addicting to watch, but for also the fighters, addicting to be in. So they don't want to retire if they have enough gas left in the tank to go on. So I think that Donald Trump has relit the fire and some of these guys, and Conor McGregor and Jon Jones are saying to himself, this is a great opportunity and I want to be there. I wouldn't want to miss a UFC event at the White House. So Jon Jones, I'm not sure if it was exactly that made you decide to unretire, but in any case, for us fans, we're very happy. Now, who would be Jon Jones' opponent at the White House? That's the question that remains, if it's going to happen. But Jon Jones tweeted out saying, it feels nice to be the hunter rather than the hunted, which of course refers to the fact that he is no longer the undisputed heavyweight champion. So Tom Aspinall is no longer chasing him, no longer hunting him, no longer saying we have to unify our belts, because now he is undisputed champion. So Tom Aspinall no longer needs Jon Jones to crown himself undisputed champion and continue his reign on the heavyweight division. So Jon Jones can stay either at heavyweight or go back down to light heavyweight, whatever he decides, but he can stay the hunter instead of being the hunted now. So who knows who he'll be proposing to fight at the White House, but I know he'll be able to now call out whomever he wants, because there's no longer this idea that he's ducking Tom Aspinall. So I think that's lifted a pressure off Jon Jones' shoulders and given him a new lease of life in the UFC. And now he wants to just come back, maybe just for one time in 2026, to have a fight at the White House and then call it a day. What beautiful send out would that be? Retiring from the UFC at the White House in the United States of America. I don't think there could be an any more beautiful way of going out, because going out the way he did, with Dana announcing it at UFC Baku, with him announcing it via a written message on Instagram and on his social media, that was not the best way to go out. And of course, we're going to be seeing very soon the best way to go out in the world in this MMA community, of course, being Dustin Poirier, who is going out, of course, in his hometown, New Orleans, Louisiana, in an amazing fight to complete the trilogy between himself and Max Holloway. And that, for me, is the way I personally love seeing fighters go out, even though it'll be still a very tear-jerking moment for us fans to see Dustin Poirier fight his last fight, and Max Holloway, who has now said he's going to try and take his last fight away from Dustin Poirier. Because, of course, in their trilogy, Max Holloway lost both initial fights. This is their third fight coming up. He lost first fight via submission and second via decision. Third fight, he's looking to win it. To say to Dustin, I completely respect you. All respect. Two guys, Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway, they're really respectful guys. But Dustin Poirier took away from me my UFC debut match, and I will take away his UFC retirement fight. Anyway, that was not what I was wanting to get on, but that's just an amazing story. Dustin said that he may have Lil Wayne coming out to sing his walkout song, which would be insane, and I'm sure he'll do it. I think Lil Wayne's up to anything at this point. But for John Jones, it just wasn't the right send out for someone as legendary as him. Throughout all the highs and lows that he's had in his career, his undoubtable presence in MMA and at the UFC is completely and utterly worthy of a send out that is as high up as you can make it. So at the White House, I think that would be the best way he could come out of the UFC and out of MMA in general. So what do you guys think of the idea of having a UFC event at the White House? Do you think it's a good idea? Donald Trump says there's a lot of space, a lot of acres of land at the White House where the UFC event can take place. And I got a bit of Fight Island vibes when, of course, during COVID, all fighters went to Fight Island and fought very far away from the usual arenas and towns and cities where they usually do their events. So I'm really excited for the idea of the UFC being brought out of the usual places we have our events and going into somewhere original as the White House, which was never happened before if Trump wasn't president. So I'm not saying Trump's the best president in the world. I would never comment on that sort of stuff. But at least this kind of stuff is very exciting. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let's talk Tony Ferguson, because Tony Ferguson has just announced that he will be moving into boxing. Of course, 3 or 4 months ago, we heard of course, of the GFL. The GFL, of course, were going to hold an enormous event with a lot of UFC veterans, a lot of retired UFC fighters, and a lot of well-known faces in the MMA world. And unfortunately, the event fell through because one of their investors initially, who had promised a certain amount of money, didn't come through with the money, and the event was cancelled. Now, we have no news on whether the GFL is going to be coming back, whether it's actually going to be existing. I kind of had the feeling that it won't exist at all, because since they announced the cancellation of that event, there has been no news on whether they're going to be re-announcing that. We would have heard something about it by now. So every one of the fighters signed to GFL are now going to be doing something else, and Tony Ferguson, who was also signed to GFL, is now saying that he's moving into boxing. Now, he has announced that his first boxing fight, will be on August the 30th of this year. No news yet on where he'll be fighting, with whom he has been signed, and who he'll be fighting at all. But at least we can say it's quite nice to hear that Tony Ferguson's still around, but good old Tony Ferguson doing as he does best, getting in there and never stopping, because he's an unstoppable force. Another person who's moved into boxing, as I forgot to mention last week, was Molly Meatball McCann. If you saw my TikTok video, I spoke about it a little bit on my TikTok. Molly McCann has signed to Eddie Hearn's Matchroom boxing promotion and will be fighting pure boxing very, very soon. Now, she is announced on her official TikTok page, of course, and she said, "I'm really excited to start this new adventure." A lot of people in the comments, including myself, saying, no jiu-jitsu, no grappling, no submissions. So I think she's going back to what she does best and what she loves, which is boxing, of course. So I'm really excited for Molly McCann also to see what she'll be able to do in boxing. And we obviously see her signing to Matchroom as a sign that people still have faith in her abilities. And thank you to Eddie Hearn for signing Molly McCann, because she had so much wasted talent retiring from the UFC at this age and this stage in her career. Of course, Tony Ferguson, we don't know who he's signed for, but I don't think it'll be with Matchroom Boxing. I'm not sure, but I don't think it will. Anyway, that's cool news for those two guys that have retired from the UFC but have not retired from the sport, because it's always sad to see people retire from the sport and never see them again. So at least we know Tony Ferguson and Molly McCann, two retirees from the UFC, are now going into boxing, and hopefully we'll have as much success as possible. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but Josh Emmett recently commented on Ilia Topuria, because Josh Emmett, if you guys remember, had a fight against Ilia Topuria over 5 rounds at a UFC Apex main event. And despite the undoubtable force of UFC's Ilia Topuria, current lightweight champion, he did not manage to knock out Josh Emmett, and he has been knocked out in the past. So this really is a good person to testify on how hard Ilia Topuria punches. And I think all of his past opponents that he has KO'd would testify to that as well and say, listen, he really did punch hard. And Josh Emmett, however, has said that he has a hard punch, but Dan Ige of the featherweight division punches even harder. Now, I did not expect him to say something like that, because Dan Ige, we've seen, of course, knock out quite a few opponents as well, but not at all bulldozing his opponents as Ilia Topuria does, especially recently. Dan Ige's last fight, he won over Sean Woodson in 2025 in April at UFC 314 via TKO in the second round of that fight. In the third round of that fight, he won via TKO. I think most of his opponents could attest to his full force and power in his punch, but I never thought that he would be, in Josh Emmett's mind, a harder puncher than Ilia Topuria. So maybe we need to keep a bit more of an eye out on Dan Ige and see where his career will be going. And his next fight, of course, is in 2 weeks at UFC's 318 pay-per-view, as I mentioned earlier, with Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway headlining over 5 rounds for the BMF title. And he'll be facing Patricio Pitbull, the newly signed ex-Bellator fighter in the featherweight division. So what might happen is that Dan Ige knocks out Patricio Pitbull, and we will be finding out for ourselves, witnessing ourselves, that this is true. What Josh Emmett is saying is true. But I just thought that was an interesting comment to mention in my podcast today, because those kinds of facts don't come out often. So it was quite nice to see Josh Emmett give Dan Ige his flowers, and also let people know Ilia Topuria may be the boogeyman right now. He may be the guy that everyone fears and thinks they can't compete with. But I went over 5 rounds with that guy, and we went to a decision, and I didn't get knocked out, which meant, of course, that the punching power of Ilia Topuria was not enough to sleep Josh Emmett. So according to Josh Emmett, Dan Ige's got a higher velocity and a higher punching power than Ilia Topuria. So yet to be seen, of course, in the higher rankings in the featherweight division. But he should take the opportunity now that Ilia Topuria has moved up to lightweight for himself, Dan Ige, to get up in the rankings and maybe show us that punching power and what it's worth. For those of you who may or may not know, I am English, of course, I'm from London, but I currently live in France, near Paris. Now, I've been in France going on 10 years. Since UFC, of course, have been coming to France, since UFC Paris, the first edition, I've been going every year. And this year is no different. I'll be at UFC Paris in September on the 6th, ready to witness Caio Borralho versus Nasty Imavov, number 1 ranked, of course, in the UFC's middleweight division. Now, another fight that's been added to the UFC Paris card that I'm very excited about is, of course, Paul Craig versus Modestas Bukauskas. And this fight is, of course, a light heavyweight. Paul Craig is staying at light heavyweight. And as I said to you guys a few weeks ago on my podcast, I was really scared that Paul Craig wouldn't be given another fight. And he himself said on his podcast that if the UFC weren't willing to give him another fight, he would be retiring entirely from the sport, because he has no interest in fighting anywhere else than the UFC. So as soon as he said that, I thought to myself, if he's saying that, that means the UFC have kind of indicated to him that he's on the last leg of his career, and maybe on a warning that this may have been your last fight, when he, of course, fought against Bellator and had no contest ruling on his fight because of an illegal high kick to the head whilst he was on the ground. Now, that fight, of course, was completely crazy, bizarre, etc. I thought, as I said to you guys a few weeks ago, that maybe Dana White would look at the footage and make a decision for himself. And I think maybe behind the scenes he may have made a decision for himself that Bellator may have done things in a weird way just to get the no contest, or especially to get the disqualification, get the win. So they've given Paul Craig another fight straight away in September. So I'm really happy to hear that from the Scotsman. He's got a very hard challenge ahead of him, of course. Bukauskas is not an easy opponent, but this fight, it's not been announced on the main card yet, but as it's Paul Craig and Bukauskas, I think this will be on the main card of UFC Paris's 6th September card at light heavyweight. But in any case, I'll be tuning in live via the Accor Arena in Paris to watch Paul Craig come back into the octagon in the flesh, and it'll be the first time I've seen Paul Craig fight in the flesh. I'm very excited. So that was an update on UFC Paris. Last little update in the MMA world, I heard talks about Eddie Hall being proposed a fight. He spoke about this quite a few months ago, but I feel like people are only picking up on it now because it's kind of shocking people to hear what he had to say. But apparently, Jake Paul and Logan Paul were interested in an MMA fight with Eddie Hall. Of course, Eddie Hall has been training MMA for quite some time now. He did his first big fight at KSW where he won via first round KO. And before that, he had a fight in a 2v1 fight against two very small individuals. It was more of an exhibition match to make money and get Eddie Hall in the octagon, I think. But his fight at KSW was a lot more official and a lot more respectful at that. Now, the idea of Jake Paul and Logan Paul versus Eddie Hall is quite interesting, of course, but seeing the sheer size of both Jake Paul and Logan Paul, it would seem very much one-sided, because even if Eddie Hall is a monstrous human being who is former strongman, I don't think it would be a very even fight. Both Jake Paul and Logan Paul against one person, even though he's a big guy, Eddie Hall, I think it'll be a very hard fight. And Eddie Hall was down for it, but he revealed in a tweet saying that he had been offered this fight on one condition, and that one condition was that if he accepts this fight, he has to accept also to go down in the third. Now, that is pure rigged fighting, of course, which is completely not going to happen. Of course, Eddie Hall said, no way, I do my fights legitimately. If they're exhibition fights or not, I do them on MMA rules, and whoever wins on that night. I will not go down in the third just to make you guys look good. And that quite stunned me, because I didn't expect people like Jake Paul and Logan Paul to even want a fight against Eddie Hall. But then to ask for a fight and to ask him to go down in the third, of course, this is all rumors, because Eddie Hall said this, but there's not been backed up by any kind of proof at all. So it's for now alleged. But if allegedly Jake Paul and Logan Paul said that, that's crazy for me. That's just crazy. Why would you say something like that? Jake Paul, especially being accused all the time of rigging his fights in boxing, that is not the kind of stuff you say to Eddie Hall, who may, as Eddie Hall does not seem to fear anybody. Eddie Hall would come out and say it, which he did. So taking the risk that Eddie Hall would spill the beans on your plans to make him go down in the third is just so risky for both Jake and Logan Paul and their reputations. So I'm not sure of the legitimacy of that rumor, that alleged statement made by the Pauls, but I will say that that is quite disappointing if it is true. Right, so that was the latest news I have for you guys. Let's move on to chapter 2 of this podcast, of course, moving on to UFC Nashville happening, of course, this Saturday night, and I'm so excited. This card is well and truly stacked, honestly. I was quite surprised actually at the quality of this card. This weekend we have a very nice card that has to be watched from start to finish, because there are quite a few people on this card that will be interesting to any of you guys watching at home. Now, one thing I'm going to say before I go over the whole card, and I'll do my main card picks as usual. Junior Tafa, one thing you must know is that on this card he is fighting now and will probably remain at light heavyweight. So of course, as you know, Junior Tafa is Justin Tafa's little brother. Real cute situation where sometimes, which happened last year, if Junior Tafa was to pull out of a fight, Justin Tafa would step in and vice versa, which I found really cool. But both guys are at heavyweight at that point, but Junior Tafa always looks smaller for a heavyweight fighter. I'm going to put on the screen right now the comparison between him at 241 pounds and him at 205, which of course shows you guys that he never really made heavyweight weight. He made the minimum, but he was never at the weight of a heavyweight. So I think that's why he had such a difficulty winning his fights at heavyweight, because he's tall, but he was a lot smaller in build. He looks ripped. He looks good. So very happy for Junior Tafa to be looking this good ahead of his fight on Saturday, and also going down onto light heavyweight may be the best decision he's made so far in his career. Only time will tell, of course. We'll see on Saturday. So let me go over the UFC Nashville card from head to toe and let you guys in on what's happening at UFC Nashville. I hope you guys are planning on watching this fight card, because it is stacked. So first fight I'd like you guys to know about is, of course, the return of Johnny Walker's brother, Walter Walker. He is, of course, at heavyweight at the moment. Walter Walker is going to be taking on Kennedy Njoku. Njoku, of course, a very dangerous, dominant fighter at 14 victories to 5 defeats. Walter being at 13 victories to 1 defeat. So this is going to be a very interesting bout. to say the least, on the prelims card. This is just prelims for now, of course. So on the prelims card, we've already got some heavy hitters, and we all love a good heavyweight fight. So this kind of fight, this excites me. It's at heavyweight and it's on the prelim cards for UFC Nashville. And of course, it foreshadows the fact that we're having a very interesting, huge heavyweight bout at the top of the card for the main event between Teixeira and Derek Lewis. On this card, we also have Lauren Murphy coming in with 16 victories to 6 defeats. She'll be taking on Eduarda Moura, who has currently 11 victories to 1 defeat. So Lauren Murphy, of course, being the veteran fighter between these two girls. Lauren at 41 years old, Eduarda at 31. This could be a pass the torch kind of situation, or Lauren Murphy could secure her place in the women's flyweight division and beat Eduarda Moura. But Eduarda has very little defeat, so she looks to be a very big challenge. So I'm excited to see how Lauren will wear in the octagon against this almost undefeated flyweight contender. On the prelims card again, we have Jake Matthews coming back. He'll be facing Chidi Njokuani. Very much a high volume, interesting fight. This is going to be heavy hitters, high paced, and very interesting to watch. Jake Matthews, of course, he's at 21 victories to 7 defeats, and Njokuani, he's at 25 victories to 10 defeats. So I'm excited to see what this fight will show us from both of these guys, and it's a very interesting prelim fight. You must tune in. Last fight on the prelims card, which is featuring, of course, someone we love, Chris Curtis. He'll be taking on Max Griffin at, of course, welterweight. Chris Curtis obviously coming off a loss against Kopylov, who we're going to be seeing very soon at UFC 318 against Paulo Costa. So he lost, of course, Chris Curtis via third round KO just before the end of the round, really. But I think he'll be raging. I think he'll be looking to come back into the octagon and win this fight. Max Griffin, of course, also a veteran fighter. Both guys are 37 and 39. These are guys at the tail end of their careers. Of course, I'd love to see them fight more. Max Griffin's been at the UFC since 2016, so he's been around for a long time. His last fight, Max Griffin, was in December of last year, and he unfortunately lost via submission in the third round. So maybe Chris Curtis could work on his grappling and maybe get a submission over Max Griffin in this fight. But we'll see what happens between these two guys. But they both have, of course, vengeance because they both are on a losing streak. So both guys will want to get back into the win column. So this fight can only be awesome. So now let's go on to my main card picks. We have 6 fights on the main card of the UFC Nashville event, and this, guys, is going to be a very stacked card, as I said. Starting off the main card, we have, of course, Junior Tafa taking on Tuco Tucos, who we saw recently take on Navajo Sterling. Navajo Sterling being one of CKB's students in New Zealand. He trains with Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, etc. So he won via decision over Tucos the last time we saw Tucos in the December 2024. So Tucos is obviously going to be looking to get back into the win column. This is a fight between himself and Junior Tafa that was delayed. We were supposed to be seeing this fight on the 4th of May at Sanhagen versus Figueiredo's fight card. We did not see them. That fight was cancelled. I believe Junior Tafa was injured. So this fight is rescheduled, of course, for Saturday night, which is a great addition to this card. And I think, if I were to give my humble opinion, I think that at light heavyweight, Junior Tafa will be very dangerous for the light heavyweights, because I see most people coming down from a higher weight class to a lower weight class as very threatening individuals, because they are used to fighting people heavier than their current opponents. So they have more punching power, they have more dominance in the octagon. So I think that Junior Tafa will get the late stoppage in this fight, or a UD against Tocos at light heavyweight. Next up on the main card, we have Vitor Petrino taking on Austin Lane. So this is kind of an interesting fight. I'm just reading up on Austin Lane, because I said Austin Lane because I know him as Austin Lane, but he's changed his name to Dejuan Lane. And Vitor Petrino is, of course, coming up from light heavyweight to face Austin Lane at heavyweight. This is his first fight at heavyweight, and if you guys remember, I'm going to call him Austin Lane because I prefer Austin, and you guys know him as Austin as well. But Austin Lane, he's a big guy, former American footballer. huge guy, very imposing heavyweight. Petrino, of course, a big guy as well, but I don't think he'll be as big as Austin Lane face to face. We'll see that on Saturday and on Friday for the ceremony weigh-ins. Age-wise, Austin Lane's 37, Petrino is 27. However, I think that coming up into heavyweight, facing a huge opponent like Austin Lane will be a very hard challenge for Petrino. But I'm going to go with Petrino, however, instead of going with my gut, because my gut says choose the original heavyweight Austin Lane. But I believe that Petrino, his skills in MMA are superior to those of Austin Lane. Petrino is a very good striker. He's a very quick striker. He's very explosive. And I feel like the punches that he'll be landing on Austin Lane will be enough to potentially knock him out. And I think this fight will be stopped in the first or second round via KO, and Petrino will get the victory in this fight. That's my opinion on that one. What do you guys think of Petrino's move to heavyweight? And what do you think will happen on Saturday between himself and Austin Lane? Next up, we have the Frenchman Morgan Charrier, who we last saw at UFC London. He was very focused on his fight against Nathaniel Wood. But unfortunately, Morgan Charrier came up short and lost via UD to Nathaniel Wood at UFC London. So, of course, everyone was very happy because Nathaniel Wood's from London. So, an amazing victory for someone that in his home country. Now, Morgan Charrier then announced 1 or 2 months after UFC London that he had signed a new multi-fight deal at the UFC, which is great news because someone coming off of 2 consecutive losses, like Morgan Charrier, it's quite risky. You may be scared that the UFC will cut you. But at 29 years old, I think Morgan Charrier has a lot more to give and a lot more improvements to make. And maybe since March, since his last fight camp, he has been able to make those improvements. And he's going to be taking on Nate Landwehr, who is a veteran fighter at 37 years old. In terms of height difference, there's not really much difference. They're both relatively the same height. Morgan Charrier has, however, a 10 centimeter disadvantage in terms of his arm reach. But I believe Morgan Charrier will get the win here. He wants to get out of the losing column. He must be boosted up by his new signing of the multi-fight deal that he has with the UFC. So I think that between Nate and Morgan Charrier will get the late stoppage or the UD in this fight via KO if the stoppage happens in the 3rd round. Now we have Calvin Kattar versus Steve Garcia. Steve Garcia, of course, hasn't lost since 2022. And he's been on a streak of putting people to sleep in the 1st round. He's a dangerous, dangerous man. Whereas, of course, Calvin Kattar has not won since 2022. And he's been put to sleep by all his opponents since 2022. So the difference here is astronomical. Both guys probably looking to get in the win column, as, of course, Steve Garcia is used to being in the win column, used to winning hands down over his opponents very quickly. He's allergic to the 2nd round at the moment. Whereas, of course, Calvin Kattar looking to get back in the win column because it's been quite some time since he's won. However, that being said, I believe Steve Garcia is still going to steamroll Kattar. I think he'll get a 1st or 2nd round stoppage again in this fight. I think it may not be stopped in the 1st because you never have someone stopping every one of his opponents in the 1st round throughout his whole career. He's been on a streak since 2022, but I think that this fight could go towards the 2nd or the 3rd round. But I believe that he'll get the 2nd round KO over Kattar. I'm sorry, Kattar, but you're not leaving the losing column just yet, in my opinion. For the co-main event of this amazing card is Stephen Thompson versus Gabriel Bonfim. Gabriel Bonfim, of course, has a record of 17 victories to 1 single defeat. And Steve Thompson, of course, coming off of a TKO loss at 17 victories to 8 defeats and 1 no contest. Steve Thompson being the veteran fighter at 42 years old and Bonfim being at 27 years old. Of course, we know Bonfim has his brother also at the UFC. Between the 2 of the brothers, he's the one with the better record. We last saw Stephen Thompson against the superstar of the welterweight division, Joaquin Buckley, who KO'd him in the 3rd round, just over 2 minutes. Now, he's been KO'd. His chin has been cracked. Will Bonfim be able to KO a Stephen Thompson, be able to finish a Stephen Thompson? That's my question. I think maybe we will see a finish from Bonfim. Now, Bonfim is more of a submission artist than a KO artist. He submits most of his opponents when he wins via finish. But Stephen Thompson is very good on the ground as well. So I think that we are most likely going to be seeing a lot of grappling in this fight, and Stephen Thompson won't let himself get submitted that easily. But I believe Bonfim will still get the victory here, and he will get it via ground and pound punches. Because having taken down Stephen Thompson, I think they'll probably grapple on the ground, wrestle a bit, change positions, and maybe, just maybe, Bonfim will get in there, try and submit him, not get the submission, and then go for the ground and pound. I think that's how we're going to see this fight go out. So I think this will happen in the second or third round. So late stoppage via ground and pound TKO for Bonfim on this co-main event over the legend, the veteran, Stephen Thompson. Sorry, Stephen. And as for the main event of the evening, we have Derek Lewis coming back after quite a hiatus from the UFC, and he'll be taking on the new boogeyman of the heavyweight division, Talison Teixeira. Talison Teixeira, of course, with a record of 8 victories to 0 defeats. He came along to the UFC at Dana White's Contender Series via a massive victory over his Contender Series opponent via TKO, of course, via KO. He is just unstoppable. We saw Justin Tafa, of course, Junior Tafa's older brother, take on Talison Teixeira earlier on this year in February at UFC 312, and unfortunately for Justin Tafa, he was at the back end of a nasty KO win for Talison Teixeira. And I think that this guy is very, very dangerous. He has everything it takes, has everything he needs to become a superstar at the heavyweight division. I was just saying a couple of weeks ago how Tom Aspinall is so good that I don't know who in the heavyweight division will have what it takes to confront him and be at his level. And maybe with a bit of work on polishing his striking, etc., maybe Talison Teixeira will be the next big heavyweight that to come across Tom Aspinall and maybe challenge him on a higher level than his other opponents. That being said, we've not seen Talison Teixeira take on a top 10 UFC heavyweight opponent. So I think this is really a big test for Talison Teixeira. I believe, in my opinion, Talison Teixeira has what it takes to be in the top 10, if not the top 5 of the heavyweight division. I hope I'm not talking too soon because we've not seen him against an opponent like Derek Lewis before. So maybe he'll get into the octagon and prove us all wrong, and Derek Lewis will just flatline him and say, that was your new prospect? I don't think so. Derek Lewis accepted this fight. This means that he's probably studied Talison Teixeira's game and probably seen some holes in the game that he might be able to capitalize on. But I believe that if Derek Lewis wants this fight, then he, of course, sees a victory in the horizon for himself. So is Talison Teixeira really going to be that boogeyman that bulldozes through any opponent we give him? Or will Derek Lewis be the one to stop the streak, the win streak that Talison Teixeira is on currently at the UFC? In my opinion, it won't be as easy one and done as some of his other fights for Talison Teixeira. We won't be seeing a first round KO over Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis is a hard knock guy. Hitting him in the head just won't necessarily knock him out straight away. That being said, I think that Derek Lewis is someone who gets tired a lot easier than other opponents that Talison Teixeira has fought. And I think that maybe at heavyweight, at this level, Talison Teixeira has maybe a better cardio than Derek Lewis. So if they take this fight to the second, third, or fourth round, I think both men will be tired, but Derek Lewis may be the more tired of the two. Now, these guys are not grapplers. They do not take down their opponents. They're more strikers. And so both guys being strikers, I believe this fight will stay on the feet and there'll be a lot of striking involved and there'll be a lot of good strikes in this game. And I think that maybe Talison Teixeira will be able to knock out a Derek Lewis. But I believe it will happen after the second round is complete. So over the third, fourth, or fifth round, I believe Talison Teixeira will KO Derek Lewis. And that's really against my heart because, of course, Derek Lewis, he's so funny, he's so likable, and he's a great fighter. So he's at the back end of his career, of course. He's 40 years old. Talison Teixeira at the start of his career at 25 years old. So really complete opposites in this heavyweight division. So as I said, will Derek Lewis be the gatekeeper of the division and stop the prospect Talison Teixeira getting the victory here? Or will Talison Teixeira bulldoze through a Derek Lewis and be the next boogeyman that bulldozes through the top 10 of the heavyweight division? In my opinion, he won't be stopped by Derek Lewis. Tyson Teixeira will continue on his win streak and keep his 0 on Saturday night. What do you guys think of Tyson Teixeira? Do you think he is the new boogeyman of the heavyweight division, or do you think we need to look and see what happens on Saturday before deciding if he's really worthy of that title? In any case, I'll let you guys let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think of my predictions for the main card of UFC Nashville on Saturday? And don't forget to tune into the prelims because, of course, as I said to you, they are looking tasty as hell. So don't miss that out. Don't miss out on that. And I will be back next week, of course, to do a little analysis and breakdown of what happened on Saturday night and go over, of course, next week's fight card. I hope you all guys have enjoyed this episode. Like, comment, subscribe as usual, and we'll see each other next week. Bye.